Well, welcome to a brand new series of videos. And they're going to be some Bible study videos along with some of our regular weekly videos. And so I'm going to start today with a study through the book of First Samuel. I'll read the entire text as we're going along. I'll try to share some of it on the screen as we go. But we're preaching through this in our church, and I wanted to follow them up with some videos to just try to help us understand the narratives. Now, narratives are larger chunks of scripture. There's usually one broad intention. And so when we're starting into First Samuel, we're going to see topics like polygamy and prayer and tabernacles and weaning a child. But when we're looking at chapter 1, that's not what this chapter is about. It's more about this one idea that we'll kind of unpack as we go along, and loosely around this idea that the God of hosts sovereignly responded to Hannah's prayers, not only for her benefit, but also for the benefit of God's covenant people. And so if we're breaking this entire chapter down, we're going to look at kind of this idea that God works in big ways through small acts, or dynamite comes in small packages. And so let's look at verse number 1 through 3 in 1 Samuel chapter 1. It says, "Now there was a certain man of Ramoth Zophim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. And he had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there." And so when I'm looking at this, we'll get into the verse by verse in a little bit. But first, if you had a short friend, you probably made fun of him or her for being short. And I had a friend that was always like that. And if we'd always make fun of her, she'd say, "Hey, dynamite comes in small packages," meaning I may be small, but I can pack a punch. And so here's a period of Israel's history that may be small and insignificant. Here's a woman named Hannah that is a barren woman, and in the grand scheme of things might seem insignificant. Again, this period of Israel's history might not have been the greatest of their history. There's a small boy, a barren woman. Now, they're small in the nation's eyes, but this is huge in God's eyes. This is like a story that's packing a big punch. So keep that in mind when we're going into 1 Samuel. But first, we're going to do some background to what the book is. First of all, when is the book? Well, the book is following Joshua and Judges. Now, in our church, we just recently preached through Joshua. They conquered the land in the book of Joshua. They were able to take over and settle the land. But then after that, they went into this downward spiral. You might call it a cycle, but for a while they would do well, and then they would forget God, and God would send enemies to punish them, and they'd cry out to God. He'd send them a deliverer or a judge, and they would be delivered from their enemies, and then they do well for a while again. And that cycle continues, only it's more than just a cycle. It's more like a downward spiral, so that everything in the book of Judges gets worse and worse and worse. And at the end of Judges, it's almost like the stories are too horrific to even describe. I mean, disgusting things. And so constantly, the children of Israel are oppressed by these Philistines. They're like the drug cartels or the gangs. Man, these people are scared to go outside. And it's like this for about 400 years. I mean, 400 years for us is Plymouth Rock. I mean, as long ago as that's as long as Israel has been largely rejecting God. And the remarkable part about this season of history is that God is still faithful to his covenant people. It's never been about them. It's always been about his faithfulness to his word. So 1 Samuel is right here in the middle of this book of Judges. Samuel is a judge and a prophet and a priest. He's at the end of an era, the end of the era of the judges, and he's ushering in a new era. This is something that is going from judge, prophet, and priest, and ending this era, beginning something new, and God comes in and intervenes for his people. So the way God transitions from one season to the next is with this story about a woman praying. Hannah, this godly lady in the middle of this godless land, praying for a child. And we read of her husband Elkanah, perhaps not wealthy, but likely not poor either, and a godly man. We see him offering sacrifices and supporting his wife's vow, going to the annual pilgrimage that they went to every year. That wasn't mandatory for the children of Israel to go to, but for these observant Hebrews who loved the Lord, he was following the Lord. But we see this major problem of polygamy. I mean, this is breaking God's obvious design of one man, one woman for a lifetime. And so already within the first few verses, we see some of these problems already coming out, in that he loved one of his wives, and it was like the other wife was just for children. So we read in verse number 4, when the time was that Elkanah offered, he came to Peninnah, his wife, and all her sons and daughters, and offered, he gave to Peninnah, his wife, and all her sons and her daughters portions, but unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. And her adversary, meaning Peninnah, also provoked her sore, for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. Now, God is the one that gives life. This is just kind of a little side note in here. And he had something wonderful for Hannah. And so she had been praying for God to give her a child, but it wasn't God's timing. So we're seeing these pictures of God's timing being the best. God's timing might be never. God, will you answer this according to the way that I want? Well, yes, I'll answer it, but the answer might be yes, it might be no, it might be wait. But the fact is, he does hear our prayers. We just have to trust that the Father knows exactly what he wants that is going to be best for us. And so in Hannah's case, these years of praying that she had done, so far the answer had been, oh, wait. She couldn't hear that answer, but that was his answer. So she's waiting for the answer, enduring this searing mockery from what the Bible calls her adversary. He's like the villain of the story. Now, this isn't just a one-time thing that she has to take it from Peninnah just once in a while. No, verse 7 says, and as he did so year by year when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. So this is one of those days that Hannah's feeling really down, and her husband tries to cheer her up. And verse 8, not the best thing to say, but then said Elkanah, her husband, to her, Hannah, why weepest thou, and why eatest thou not? Why is thy heart grieved? Am not I better to thee than 10 sons? So he tries to give her some encouraging words, but nothing is helping. And after dinner one night, on this particularly bad day, she takes a trip to the tabernacle and goes to pray. Verse 9, so Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh, and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by the post of the temple. Now, this is not Solomon's temple that hadn't been built yet, but in Exodus, remember, God was very particular about how the tabernacle was supposed to be set up. It was temporary because they moved around so much. It was made of tent material. But now we see that it's more or less of a permanent location. There's pillars that are there. There's a sort of structure that's there. There's a wooden doorpost that's referred to. In verse 9, it's called the temple here. And this is the temple of the Lord, the structure where the Ark of the Covenant is kept. And so the structure is not necessarily important. It's what Hannah does in this story that's important. She prays and she weeps sore. Verse 10, she was in bitterness of soul and prayed unto the Lord and wept sore. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, And remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man child. Then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life. There shall no razor come upon his head. Now, this isn't a bargaining chip. An Old Testament vow that she's making here is not a bargaining chip. If she's a devout follower of God, this was for her a form of worship. It was an act of devotion to God. It was an expression of her love to the Lord. And so we'll see this in the next video and in the next chapter. But this is what the vow is about. This is her prayer to God, is her devotion to the Lord. And she is praying, God, give me a son. If you give me a son, I'll give him to the Lord. It was a dedication that all parents might take. At our church, we do baby dedications. It's not a confirmation. It's not a baptism or anything like that. It's just following this biblical example of a mom and a dad, in our case, recognizing that, look, this child that we've received is from God. And so the parents come before the congregation and say, in front of my church family, I want to be accountable to the rest of my church family to raise these kids in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And so as Hannah is sitting here praying, begging God to give her a child, her lips are moving. She's pouring her heart out to God. And Eli the priest is over there standing to the side, and he thinks that she's drunk. So verse 12, it came to pass as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli marked her mouth. Now, Hannah, she spoke in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli thought she'd been drunken. And Eli said unto her, How long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. And Hannah answered and said, No, my Lord, I'm a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I've drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. He's going, hey, get out of here. That's not what this is about. She's going, no. I'm pouring my soul out to the Lord. Verse 16, Count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hitherto. She's saying that is not what this is about. I'm not drunken. Now he was saying, no, hey, get out of here. Get out of here. But then after realizing what she's doing, verse 17 says, Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. And so he understands this is from the Lord, and he blesses her, says, Go in peace. And she went away super happy. And verse 18, she said, Let thine handmaid find grace in thy sight. So the woman went her way and did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. And they rose up in the morning early and worshiped the Lord in return, and came to their house to Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come, about after Hannah had conceived, that she bore a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked him of the Lord. And the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer unto the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vow. And so she names him Samuel. I've asked him of the Lord. His Hebrew name is a combination of words that mean just that. And so the closing text then is how Hannah was the one that vowed the vow, but Elkanah was the one that validates the vow, agrees to it. And Elkanah and all his house went up to offer the Lord, verse 21 says, the yearly sacrifice and his vow. But Hannah went not up, for she said unto her husband, I'll not go up until the child be weaned, and then I'll bring him, that he may appear before the Lord, and there abide forever. And so Samuel's weaned much later than in our Western culture, but she would have had plenty of time then to instill some godly values in him in this culture of worldliness. Eli's own sons were very worldly and wicked. And so we can't take Eli's advice on parenting, but she goes to parent Samuel, her son. And then eventually she goes to the house of the Lord. She brings the offerings, and she brings the child that she promised to serve in the house of God. And that's what the following verses on. Verse 23. And Elkanah her husband said unto her, Do what seemeth thee good. Tarry until thou hast weaned him. Only the Lord establish his word. So The woman abode and gave her son suck until she weaned him. When she'd weaned him, she took him up with her, with 3 bullocks and 1 ephah of flour and a bottle of wine, and brought him into the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young, and they slew a bullock and brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I'm the woman that stood by thee here, praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. And we look at this beautiful story, and we might take a step back and look at what's going on here. And we're seeing that this is a story about a godly woman's prayer. But that's maybe what it looks like on the surface. But again, from that, you can learn many lessons, that God hears our prayers. He desires us to pray. It's about God's timing in answering prayers. His answers to prayers might be different from our own. And that's a wonderful thing. I'm confident that there's a God in heaven that hears our prayers, and not only hears our prayers, but cares about our prayers. We can kind of put ourselves in the place of Hannah here. And as Christians, she didn't even have the same access to God that we do. Jesus Christ has shed his blood for us as Christians. These Old Testament vows and sacrifices were a system that they had of accessing God. But we as Christians don't have to go through a priest like Eli. We have a great high priest who shed his blood for us. And we can go to God himself in the Holy Spirit dwelling in us, and he can take the utterances of our soul, of our inner prayers. Sometimes when we don't even know what words to say, there's an agony of soul that the Holy Spirit can take and translate into words. Sometimes when it's not even words, when we don't even know what to say, God knows exactly where you are. He knows exactly what you're going through, and he knows exactly what's best for you. And he can work those things for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. And it's through Jesus Christ. It's through his finished work on the cross, the blood, that gives us direct access to God. So we don't have to go through Eli anymore. We are our own priests. So there's that aspect of the story of prayer that we can learn here from this text. But also, what does this text mean? What's that supposed to mean? What is all this about prayer supposed to mean? If I step back and look at where chapter 1 is in the scheme of history, and in this course of history, there's the movement of the book of Judges and Israel rejecting God. And now there's this little baby named Samuel who would guide the kingdom in this godly course. And it's like all of that is the result of a godly mother's prayers. She's praying to the Lord of hosts. We read that in verse 3 and 11. You see the Lord of hosts, the Lord who's in control of the hosts, or of all of the armies. The hymn says, Lord Sabaoth his name, from age to age the same. On earth is not his equal. Well, the Lord of hosts is the Lord of Sabaoth. That's who Hannah is praying to. So it's like, okay, here's a God that's working on your behalf, even when you don't always realize it. Stepping back from this picture, we see that there's this great transition happening in the land of Israel. And there's a God who's working through these tiny little prayers of individuals. Now, I see that, and I'm looking at sometimes my own insignificance. I feel like, man, I'm not making a difference. Am I? What am I even here for? I'm just one person among many. I don't know even what impact I'm making. But in the simple prayers, we can learn, well, if you're praying for the Los Angeles fires, for example, for us, that was, depending on when you're watching this video, it might have been within recent history, or maybe it was a long time ago for you, but it's like, how do I pray for that? Well, we know that God can bring good out of these fires. I believe he will. And so I don't know what part of life is considered bad or good. I mean, calling something bad or good, that's not really my call. Same thing with praying for our nation. The leadership of President Trump, it's not like he's a godly man seeking the Lord for every decision. But as a nation, even though as a whole we're not a godly nation, we're praying for our nation and we desperately need the Lord. And so I want to pray for God to do his will. And I know God can do his will and it can be good. I just don't know whether something is good or bad. In my limited view, something might be good now, but it might be bad in the long run. There might be something that seems bad right now, but in the long run, God means it for our good. And so what I'm saying is we can trust that there's a Lord Sabaoth, that there's a Lord of hosts that sees the beginning from the end and will run exactly what he wants to happen. I remember hearing a story about a farmer. You've probably heard this. A horse ran away and the neighbors said, "Oh, how sad. What a bad thing." The farmer, maybe if he's a Christian, he's just trusting God. "Well, I'm just trusting God. We'll see what happens." And then the horse returns with more horses with it, wild horses. The neighbors go, "Wow, what a good thing." And the farmer says, "Well, I'm just trusting God. We'll see what happens. I don't know if it's good." The farmer's son tries to ride one of the wild horses that came in, and he's bucked off and he breaks his leg. And the neighbors go, "Oh, how sad. What a bad thing." And the farmer goes, "Well, it might be bad. I'm just trusting God. We'll see what happens." A few days later, some soldiers come through the villages to draft some young men into the army, but the boy has a broken leg and he's passed over. And the neighbors go, "Wow, what a good thing." And the farmer goes, "Oh, it might be good. I'm just trusting God. We'll see what happens." Now, that's just an old story, basically making the point that we aren't the ones that see the beginning from the end, but God is. So it's like when God hears the prayers of his people who are under the thumb of the Philistines, it might have felt like God was ignoring them for a really long time. 400 years, God, where are you? And he might have been working all the way over in Mount Ephraim with a man named Elkanah and a wife named Hannah, working to bring them a child named Samuel for the answer that Israel needed. This answer that Israel needed was years in the making. It was years in the answering. And so I believe that a big lesson in this chapter, and one of the reasons of the book of 1 Samuel is the sovereign design of God for our life, that God was working not only in response to Hannah's prayers. Yes, it is a picture of Hannah's answers to prayers, but also it's a picture of his covenant response to his covenant promises to his people. And there's this new phase of history coming. And Samuel's going to be the one. He's going to be the prophet who ushers in the monarchy. Here's the King David that's coming. Here's the King of Kings that's going to come from the line of David that's coming. And here's little Samuel that's going to be the one to spiritually guide the people into the greatest era that Israel had ever seen. I'd say it's like dynamite. It's a big explosion in a small package. And here's this big idea again, that the God of hosts sovereignly responded to Hannah's prayers, not only for her benefit, but also for the good of his covenant people. What was God responding to in this story? Well, he's responding to Hannah's prayers. Well, it doesn't say here, but apparently also responding to Israel's prayers. There's always likely a remnant that was praying for God to bring some deliverance. And so God's responding to Hannah's obedience, knowing she was staying faithful even through all these years of ridicule. But through her faithfulness was even answering some bigger prayers at the same time. Now, I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what kind of prayers you're praying, but your obedience to God is what he's looking for from you right now. And we can look at Hannah and say, look, God responded to her sacrificial heart, to her vow. She gave her only son to God in service to him. Verse 28 said, Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. He was lent to the Lord, this little child. God, this may not seem like anything significant. It's no big deal. Man, what's all the fuss about this one boy, Samuel? How does he get his own book in the Bible? Wow. No, but we're talking about the changing of a nation happening because of this little boy who loved the Lord, as a result of a woman who loved the Lord, who was praying and talking to the Lord as a result of that. And so Eli's sons, man, they're not fit to take over for their dad. It's like, here's Samuel, the one that was going to turn the spiritual tide of the nation of Israel. And I'm looking at this story and looking at the broad view of history of Israel. And I'm seeing that, man, God works in big ways through small acts and small people. The Lord of hosts is on his throne. He'll never be defeated. His will be accomplished. And it's kind of a simple message that I take from chapter 1. We need to trust God. He might be working in ways that we can't see yet. He's called us to be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. For as much as you know, your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Well, I can't wait to get into chapter 2. That'll be in one of the next videos. We'll see you then. God bless you.